What is up? 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 What is up, Grocknation? Welcome back this evening to the arcade as we continue our read of the UFC Encyclopedia for everyone's listening pleasure, as well as my MMA historians, or rather UFC historians, I guess you could say. Although we found out last episode from flipping through it that Pride FC is covered in here to a degree, maybe not all of it. But yeah, we're going to continue on with the fighter list, which again I will give you guys, rough backstories and stories of each of these fighters. We're only in the B's, for God's sake, or the C's, but with that being said, guys, let's get into this. Before we get started, though, like I said, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and smash that subscribe button so you get further notifications on when new videos come out. Particularly the next edition of this, is we are going to do the whole damn book. I have decided, because I enjoyed doing the first book so much, so that's what we're going to do. But first things first, guys, just like last time, we are going to remove the sleeve, just to make everything a little easier. I turned off the autofocus, so we shouldn't have to worry about the video unfocusing on us out of nowhere. So this is a really nice little, it's octagon, see that? It's a 3D print. I always love actually looking at books under the sleeves all the time, hardcovers, because there's usually some interesting stuff like this, like a sticker texture. But regardless, let's get back. Sorry about that, guys. I smoked the camera with the book, so we gotta be careful with that. But we were on C with Dominic Cruz, I believe. There's that vintage UFC logo. Man, there's so much to go through here, guys. I wonder how much we'll get through today. Yeah, we just did Randy. Here we go. This is where we left off. So let's start at the very top here. I can see one of my old favorites back in the day. Okay, so here's Crazy Tim Crowder. What's his nickname? Does it say Crazy? Yeah, Crazy right there. Crazy Tim Crowder. He was a journeyman UFC guy, 3-1 at this point in 2011, but I think he ended up going 500. And they actually ended up letting him go. If anyone is aware of UFC lightweight Dustin Poirier, he actually was coached by Crazy Tim Crowder, and there was an amazing MMA documentary following Dustin Poirier called Fightland, and he's featured in there prominently because he's Dustin's coach, Crazy Tim Crowder. He was on one of the Ultimate Fighters. I think he was on the season with Junie and Darth Bader and Christoph. Guys, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but the last video, I don't know, my historians definitely would have noticed, guys, I haven't watched UFC in like 8 years. And people, ask me all the time, excuse me, I drank Coke, why'd you stop watching it? Because this is something I would watch every other day of my life, especially while I was training. It was something I kept track of every damn day. And they're like, why'd you stop watching it? Why'd you stop watching it? Because it became so oversaturated. If I like Dominic Cruz, for example, back in the day, I knew I could watch the Dominator fight, 2 times, maybe 3 times in a calendar year. Today's UFC, with how big the roster is, I'm lucky if I see Dominic Cruz fight once every 2 years. So, there's just too much. There's too much fighters now. I can't remember, I think it was 600 fighters or something crazy last time I checked. And it's too much. There was, at one point, there was 1 or 2 events every week. And, if you miss a couple, you maybe is an up-and-comer and you don't know what's going on, you're kind of out of the loop. Kind of makes you not want to bother, trying to keep up. Whereas my buddy Jackass would record it and he would watch, and he still does. He watches every single damn event. I can't. So I basically slowly started just watching the big main fights of my old school fighters. But other than that, I don't pay attention to it. I don't watch it. I don't know who most of the champions are nowadays. Speaking of which, guys, this is 2011. I don't even think there's female fighters in here yet. Like, I don't even think they're in the book yet. I think that was 2014, 2013 when Ronda Rousey and them came in, but we're getting off topic. But that's why I don't watch it. Where I was getting at originally was I will make mistakes every now and then, because a lot of this information is 15, sometimes 20 years old. So I might say the wrong names, the wrong events, but I catch it later on. I'm like, God damn, that was the wrong Ultimate Fighter I was talking about or whatever. But regardless, I just figured I'd clear that up. I don't think you guys really care too much, though. You guys are probably enjoying this just for the ASMR aspect of it as well as me touching on some UFC topics, which some of you might want. So let's go to the first big Pride fight. That's not true. Yeah. I'd say the first big Pride fighter. Coleman, I was going to say as well, but Coleman's more so UFC. It's not fair to Coleman. Coleman won the Grand Prix, the very first one, so I'd say the second big Pride fighter, which is Mirko Filipovic. The nickname Grock, his real name is Mirko Filipovic, is because he was a Croatian cop in Croatia back in the day. As you can see, he's from Croatia. This guy was a legendary kickboxer. Not there, that's the pedophile, or the groomer, I should say. Pat Perry, we discussed him last video. He used to have a legendary left high kick that had super highlight reel knockouts in Pride FC. He came from the K1 kickboxing world, and he actually went to the finals of K1 2000, I think. K1 Grand Prix 2000. He actually went to the finals and he fought Mark Hunt, and he lost to Mark Hunt. Famously, so he never did win a K1 Grand Prix, but he was, that just shows you the level of kickboxer he was. But he had a legendary high kick. You guys can YouTube it right now. Mirko Grock high kick, just high kick highlights. He's got other highlights as well, other knockouts, but his kicks are what made him super fucking crazy and famous. He used to say, right kick. If he kicked in here with a right kick hospital, left kick cemetery is what he used to say, and it looked like he killed some of the guys he kicked in the head. His title's held as the 2006 Pride Openweight Grand Prix champion. So Pride had two Openweight Grand Prix. The very first one that Coleman won, and this one in 2006. I watched all 3 rounds of the 2006 one. I actually was cheering for Vanderlei Silva, and Grock fought him in his semifinals. And he kicked him in the head, and I thought he killed Vanderlei. Vanderlei was knocked out. He wasn't moving. He looked like his head was split open from the kick, like his actual skull was split open. It looked like. I remember me and my buddy Jackass. We actually stopped, like, cheering or being shocked, and we were like quiet, looking at each other, going, "Oh my God, I think he might be dead." But no, he wasn't. Vanderlei Silva was never the same after getting knocked out from Grock. His chin was gone. I think it really messed his brain up. But Vanderlei Silva was a natural light heavyweight, middleweight, and he fought Grock, who was a heavyweight. That might have actually been the final, you guys. That might have been the Pride final. Because I think it was. I think that's who Grock fought in the finals. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's who it was. So up next we got the Dominator, Dominic Cruz. One of the most unorthodox fighters I remember in the UFC. He came from the WEC. He titles held UFC and WEC Bantamweight champion. He was the Bantamweight champion for a long time before Demetrius Johnson beat him, I think. Mighty Mouse, if I remember correctly. But he had such a weird fighting style. Like, he constantly changes his stances from southpaw to orthodox, and it really throws off his opponents, and he's a really, really great wrestler as well. He's retired now, though. I think he's a full-time still is, but he was when I stopped watching. So over here we got Marcio Cruz, the Brazilian, Petey Pano, I remember. He was a heavyweight. He fought some pretty good heavyweights, if I remember correctly. I think he even had a title fight against Rampage Jackson. I can't remember, or not Rampage Jackson. Sorry. Was it Shane Carwin? I can't recall. I remember he beat Frank Mir when Frank Mir tried to come back from his bicycle accident. That was pretty much what made him famous. But I mean, that's more so just to show how badly Frank Mir was fucked up. In my opinion, Frank Mir beats him when he's completely healthy. Luke Como. Oh, sorry, I bumped the mic there. Lucky Luke, the Silent Assassin. He was in Ultimate Fighter Season 2. He was the guy that looked really nerdy. He always wore the glasses and everything. Season 2 was Matt Hughes and Rich Franklin were the coaches of Season 2. And, yeah, I don't know where he went. Yeah, he defeated Anthony Torres and Sausage Tit Sam Morgan. And he went to the top finals. He would have lost to Joe Stevenson. And yeah, he lost to Joe Stevenson. So he was the finalist with Joe Stevenson. Joe Stevenson actually ended up he was a really good fighter, and he ended up getting a title fight against BJ Penn, which he famously lost, and BJ Penn bloodied him, and he was crying, screaming on the ground, covered in blood. It was a really iconic MMA picture. Mac Danzig, the lightweight Mac Danzig, he was the Tough 6 winner. He was not a stickler, but he was just a boar. He was a real big boar. He was one of the most touted fighters in the. I remember hearing about him. He was one of the most touted fighters going into the house, because at this point of the UFC, they're tough, or the Ultimate Fighter houses were established fighters that were known in the MMA community because MMA was big. So I knew of Mac Danzig when he went into the house, and he was actually my favorite to win that weight class, which was the lightweights. That season 6 was the lightweights and light heavyweights. That's one with Junie Carter and all them. The Irish Hand Grenade from season 2, Marcus Davis. He actually had a couple big fights. He was a boxer from Boston, I believe, or Maine. Yeah, Bangor, Maine. The Irish Hand Grenade. He was on fight nights. I'm pretty sure he headlined some fight nights. He went on a bit of a run for a while with knockouts. He beat Melvin Glard, that's right. Melvin Glard was caught talking shit about Matt Hughes, which is a really funny little segment in there. But everyone thought Melvin was going to beat him because he was just a striker. He was a boxer. But he learned the ground game, it says here, and he ran off an 11-fight win streak that featured 6 submission wins and 6 UFC victories. So maybe 6 in the UFC straight. 6 in the UFC straight. The ultra-popular Irish Hand Grenade eventually hit some landmines, though, losing 4 of his last 5 octagon bouts before being released in 2011. So I do remember him going on a bit of a tear. I didn't know it was that good. Down here we have Phil Davis, Mr. Wonderful. I don't really remember much from this guy at all. I remember he was an NCAA wrestler, but he's 5-0 right now. Did this guy get a title? Who did this guy fight? He showed improvement. He defeated Brian Stan, Alex Gustafson, Rodney Wall. He beat Alex Gustafson. I don't remember this guy, to be honest with you. Tim Bosch, Rogerio Nogueira. So he defeated these are big fucking names, you guys. These are big names. I don't remember this guy. I don't know whatever happened to him. Yeah, jeez. Tony D'Souza, this is an old fighter. Well, not old age-wise, but I mean, yeah, probably now, yeah. Because I remember, UFC 31, 2001. Yurido Nakao, Dustin Hazlett, Diego Alves. Those are some of the bouts he had. This was his last match. It was a TKO loss to Rowan Kerner. I didn't even know who that is. 2006. 2007 must have been a prelim fight. The name sounds familiar, I just never paid attention to him, I guess. So here's one of the more famous brothers duos in combat sports, the Diaz brothers. Nathan's actually got a bigger page than Nick. So Nate won the Ultimate Fighter Season 5. I think we discussed that for some reason last time, even though we never got to this, but the lightweights was Season 5, one of my most favorite seasons. First time they got lightweights, because the UFC got rid of the lightweight division for, I want to say 3 years. They absolutely eliminated it, because this, like I said, UFC's back then, they would have a UFC like 4 times a year. So they didn't have room for a stable of lightweights, so they absolutely eliminated the lightweight class. One of the reasons why BJ Penn moved up to welterweight and ended up beating Matt Hughes, believe it or not. But so lightweights left UFC, and they brought them back. And one of the ways they brought them back with a bang was they had the Ultimate Fighter Season 5, which was just all lightweights. The coaches were Jens Pulver and BJ Penn. And these were the best lightweights that were out in MMA at the time that weren't signed with the UFC, including Nate Diaz, who actually wasn't my favorite to win this one. What the hell was the guy's name? Matt Wyman, I think his name was. That was the guy I thought would win the whole thing. He was the one I paid attention to outside the UFC that entered the house. But Nate's got an 8-4 record right now. As of 2011, I think he's closer to 500 now. He's the Diaz brothers, him and Nick. They're brawlers. They're from Stockton. They're street brawlers. They're both Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts from Cesar Gracie. And yeah, they're just dogs. They love fights. They're always part of these. There's a new UFC title that Dana White implemented the last few years. It's called the Bad Motherfucker Belt, and it's basically just for the brawlers. The brawlers fight for it. It's not a real belt, I guess you could say, in that aspect, but Nate actually fought Jorge Masvidal for that recently, and I actually watched that event. But yeah, Nathan Diaz, no UFC titles ever, but he was, like I said, Ultimate Fighter Season 5 winner. That was his big claim to fame. Over here we got Nick Diaz. He was 6-4 in UFC. I think by this point he came back and fought, or afterwards he came back and he fought George St. Pierre. And then obviously Carlos Condit as well was another person he fought. He had 2 big fights. The fight with George St. Pierre was big. It was a good test, I figured. And yeah, George just out-wrestled him. Beat him really on the scorecards like George does notoriously. Both these brothers, more so Nick. Nate kind of cleaned up, but Nick can never keep like his drug or his piss clean. And not for steroids, but for marijuana. He was always pissing on for marijuana. I don't know what the landscape is now with marijuana being, mostly legalized everywhere. But at the time, he would always get caught for marijuana, and Dana White ended up cutting him. He had a really big fight at Pride FC's one and only event in the U.S. called The Real Deal. He got a reverse Gogo Plata on Takanori Gomi, which is Pride's lightweight champion. It was a really epic picture. I remember it was called Pimp My Triangle. It was on all the magazines. It was really impressive. But yeah, these brothers, they're just big brawlers, and they're two of the more recognizable, more so Nate fighters in mixed martial arts. Nate because of he's had bigger fights than Nick. In terms of like fanfare, obviously Nate's had his 2 fights at Conor McGregor, including the one where he choked him out. So we're gonna go down here, and this guy, actually I have a tie to this guy, believe it or not. Al Dirte Joe Dorkson from Winnipeg, Manitoba. Right there, you can see. So my MMA coach in Winnipeg, the one we were affiliated with him, he actually cornered me during my fight. Actually came up training with Joe Dorkson. They were both trained by the same Hickson Gracie trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt clan. I can't remember his last name, but they are partners. And his partner was Curtis Brigham. That's the coach from Winnipeg that I used to train with. Curtis Curtis went off and started his own gym, and Joe went off and started training in other gyms in the U.S. because Joe was, between the two fighters, Joe was the more well-known because he fought in the UFC. Curtis never did. Curtis fought overseas in Japan, but Curtis had a more successful win-loss championship-wise than Joe did. Curtis actually won world titles. Joe never really achieved any of that, but he was a good fighter to watch. Like I said, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He was a good striker. As we can see here, he's got a 2-7 record, unfortunately for Joe. CB Dalloway, I think this is another Ultimate Fighter member, if I remember correctly. All-American wrestler. Yep, Ultimate Fighter Season 7, he was the finalist. He beat Jesse Money, Jesse Taylor, Jay Silva. He beat Joe Dorkson, so he's actually beaten this guy. Who did he fight in the finals? I'm not sure. He was teammates with Ryan Bader and Cain Velasquez at Arizona State. Night Awards, introducing fight fans to the deadly wonders of the Peruvian. Yes, this was the Peruvian necktie guy. So the Peruvian necktie guy, our Peruvian necktie is a really, really cool, almost like a guillotine choke. Guillotine choke from the mount, or the north-south position where you use your leg. I've actually used it on people before, and it throws them off. It's a really unexpected choke. The finalist, Ultimate Fighter Season 7. I don't know who Season 7 winner was. Whoever it was, it beat CB. Remember my buddy Mike was really big on CB, wanted CB to win. Rafael dos Anjos, he's 3-3 right here. He's famous, probably most famous for getting a diving uppercut knocked out from Jeremy Stevens. Like from a mile away, Jeremy Stevens wound it up. He smacked him, and I remember his big cauliflower ears were shaking as he was hitting the fence, and he was knocked clean out. That's probably the biggest thing. I remember him for, I feel like he got a UFC title fight, but I don't think so. Maybe not, actually. So here's Gagano. Junior dos Anjos. I think he fights for out of Brazilian top team, I think. Or the Black Zillions, I can't recall. I think he was Brazilian top team, though. He was a UFC heavyweight champion. Big, powerful boxer. He had lots of knockouts, including one, famously, of Cain Velasquez. Well, that's not it. That's not it either. That's him knocking out Grock. Did he fight Velasquez yet here? No, he's not a champion yet. You can see he would have had it here. That's one of his accolades. So he would end up knocking out Cain Velasquez on the UFC's very first broadcast on Fox. UFC signed at the time, they're not with them anymore, but they signed a big contract with Fox TV to try to get make the UFC more mainstream, and that would have been 2012, 2013. I remember it was a free title fight, Cain versus Junior, and I was so pumped because that's a fight I would have bought the pay-per-view for. And it was like an hour of them hyping up the fight, the panel, because there was no other fights. It was just that. And then this fight lasted like less than 30 seconds. Junior knocked out Cain. I couldn't believe it. Cain was one of my favorite heavyweights of all time, but yeah, he ended up beating Cain, and Cain ended up going back and beating him. And then Cain lost it to Fabricio Verdum, and geez, I have to think where it went from there. Thomas Drawell, the Gorilla, 3-3 UFC record. When did he fight? Jesus, I don't even know who this guy is. Try to read and see if I can recognize any names. Some of them I recognize from knockouts or him getting knocked out. That looks like he's fighting Mike Quick-Swick right there. See how welterweight he is? That's Quick-Swick then. So he fought Mike Swick. He lost Thiago Silva too. He's 18-4 from Poland. I don't know. Don't know who he is. So down here we got Evan Dunham. This guy looked like he was kind of on his way to a title shot. 2000s, yeah, 2009. Was his first fight. Okay, I lost to Melvin Gillard. Slowed down him. Yeah, no kidding. Melvin Gillard is the guy that lost to Luke Como. The little guy that was calling out Matt Hughes in Ultimate Fighter Season 2. But don't remember much else from this guy. Anything notable? No title fights, nothing like that. I wish they would show their gyms. They don't show where gyms they fight out of. Maybe that's why I recognize some of these people they fought at the gyms I was fans of. Marvin the Beastman Eastman, UFC record of 1-4. He's an old school fighter. Yeah, he debuting with a win over Jackson in 2000. Yeah, that's right. Rampage Jackson had the one fight in UFC way back in 2000. Was that actually? I don't even know. I don't think that was in the UFC. I think that was in King of the Cage. Regardless, I remember that was his big claim to fame. He beat Rampage Jackson. Obviously, Rampage Jackson would be a superstar in Pride and an eventual UFC light heavyweight champion. But the big thing I remember from him is getting KO'd with a big knees from Vitor Belfort when Belfort came back from his loss to Randy. That was his big comeback fight. He came back and he knocked out Eastman with knees, violent knees. Okay, so let's move on here. Oh, Frankie Edgar. So I remember Frankie Edgar. Oh, geez, what UFC was it? He was on a prelim against Tyson Griffin. And it was a prelim. Me and my buddy Jackass are watching on the pay-per-view, and we were both just blown away who this little wrestler was from Jersey. And my God, man, he would end up being a UFC lightweight champion. I'm not sure if he was a 1 or 2-time lightweight champion. He ended up beating Penn in Japan, if I remember correctly. He either beat BJ Penn in Japan, or he lost to Benson Henderson in Japan. I can't remember. We're gonna have to skim through this now. He was turning off the pen again. This time he made sure there were no questions. He shut the prodigy over 5 rounds. If that weren't good enough of an encore, he faced off against old nemesis Gray Maynard. I realized the crown. Frank Edgar seems to be holding. Okay, so he's still the champion here. 2010. Of course he wouldn't. He'd come back in 2010. Okay, so when did he fight Penn? I was living in my apartment. I remember when he beat Penn. Yeah, there's the Tyson Griffin fight. Mark Bocek, Spencer Fisher, Hermes Franca. That's a fucking pedophile right there. He actually is in jail right now for pedophilia. Like he was having sex with his underage cousin or something. And even as long defeat the Gray Maynard in 08. By the time his 2009 bout with Sean Shirk arrived, he had developed a refined stand-up game that opened plenty of eyes. Today he's a world champion. Of course he wouldn't. Okay, so yeah, it was August 2010. He beat Penn, so that must have been in UFC Japan. We'll see. Eventually, when we get to the UFC events, which is back here, they go through literally every single event, as you guys can see, with the posters and everything. Oops. We'll definitely see then. But a great little wrestler. Well, a really, really super exciting little fighter to watch. He just never stops, like the Energizer Bunny. Great fights, and I watched most of his fights during his reign. I was a really big fan of Frankie Edgar. So here's a classic. Yves Edwards. One of the original lightweights. So back when, before the UFC got rid of the lightweights, they got rid of the lightweight division in the late 40s, like UFC 48. UFC 48, 47 was the last lightweight fights. Their roster was small because BJ Penn wasn't actively in the UFC. He was fighting in Japan, like K1 Dynamite and stuff. But Yves Edwards, Josh Thompson, Hermes Franca. Damn, I can't remember the rest of them. There was only like 5 lightweights for the division. Yves Edwards is one of them. Oh, there we go. Rich Nolov Clemente was one. Nick Aguilar, Hermes Franca, Josh Thompson, John Gunderson. These are fighters I remembered. He had a he had a highlight knockout. I can't remember, like a spinning kick or something. That's Clay Guida. He's fighting right there. Justin Eilers sounds familiar. Don't remember this guy at all. Former starting linebacker for Iowa State. Eilers knocked out Mike Kyle at UFC 49, but was victim to a first-round finish himself 6 months later against Paul Bontello. Eilers received the title shot in the next bout. So yeah, 49, so he was fighting in the mid-2000s. Eilers would receive a title shot in his next bout, but against Andrei Arlovsky, his body gave out on him as he tore his AC. Oh, this is the guy, okay. He literally just collapsed. His knee got blown out during Arlovsky's uneventful UFC heavyweight title run. And I remember Arlovsky was just super happy, like he won the title. And then Brandon the Truth Fairy knocked him out. Yeah, okay. Record 10-2 in his final 12. Eilers was shot and killed by his what the fuck? With a record of 10-2 in his final 12, Eilers was shot and killed by his stepfather during a domestic dispute. On December 25th, 2008, he was 30 years old. Holy shit, I don't remember that at all. I wonder if Jack has it, remember that. Jake the Juggernaut Ellenberger. I remember this guy. He actually got a UFC title shot, if I remember correctly. Against St. Pierre, did he not? Oh, no, he was fighting Carlos Condit for the WEC title. Did he get a UFC title shot? I feel like he would have. He's 4-1 in the UFC right now, so he'd be pretty damn close in terms of the lightweight division in 2011. Razor Rob Emerson, aka the Saint, I think. Razor Rob McCullough. He changed it to Razor Rob because of Razor Rob McCullough. He used to be Razor Rob. He was on one of the Ultimate Fighters, yeah, Ultimate Fighter Season 5. He engaged in an exciting bout with Gray Menard in the season finale before the bout was ruled a no contest. So he's beaten Keith Nakamura, Manny Gambarian, who was the finalist of that Ultimate Fighter, and Philip Nova, who was also on the Ultimate Fighter Season 7, I believe. But losses against Dos Anjos and Nick Lentz promoted his release in 2010, so that's all for Rob Emerson. Efrain Esquadardo, again, another Ultimate Fighter winner, Ultimate Fighter Season 8. That was the St. Pierre and Josh Koscheck season. Who did he fight in the finals? Nothing ever came of him. I think he got released. He was one of the first, if not the first, UFC Ultimate Fighter winner to get released. Yeah, he was released from his contract in late 2010. I think that was the big story. He was the first tough winner to get released from the UFC. Here's English Terry Adam. He had a highlight reel spinning back kick and knockout of somebody. I wonder if it'll show on here. No. Doesn't say on here. He has a really wicked spinning back kick. You can see it on YouTube right now. I can't remember who exactly it was. He knocked out, but again, middle of the road journeyman UFC guy, but that's his highlight for sure, is that knockout. Suga Rashad Evans, the Ultimate Fighter Season 2 heavyweight winner, and a UFC light heavyweight champion. So Suga Rashad in Season 2 was the black sheep, and the reason why he came from Michigan, Michigan State. He was a Michigan State Spartan wrestler. He was one of the ones when the season started. I'm like, this is the guy, I think. Like, he should be really good because he's an NCAA wrestler. But he came into the house incredibly out of shape. And I think he was one of the last fighters picked, if not the last fighter picked. Like, he was out of shape. He was puking everywhere. And I remember going, oh my goodness, when they were doing the biographies and everything, I'm like, this is a guy to watch. And then that first week when they're doing evaluations for team picks, again, it was Rich Franklin and Matt Hughes. I'm like, there's no fucking way that this guy is going to win the show. There's no way. He would win the show. He'd get in shape and he would win. Geez, who did he fight in the finals now? I wonder if it's going to say. Was it Luke Como? No, Luke Como lost to Joe Stevenson. Who the fuck he lost to a big fat guy. Yes, I remember now. A big fat wrestler. Jeez, we gotta look now. Again, this guy, that fat wrestler, nothing ever came of him after that. Ultimate Fighter was in 4 months later, he had a UFC contract. There was an easy Sam Hoger. It's not gonna say, is it? Okay, so I'll just give you a rough what happened after the Ultimate Fighter. So he actually went defeated for a very long time. He had a big fight against Michael the Count Bisping, the Brit we talked about last episode way back here in the Bees. The guy that lost his eye, he was a tough winner as well. He was Ultimate Fighter Season 3 winner. He was a 2 winner. They had a big undefeated fight pay-per-view where one of the O's had to go, and Rashad beat Bisping in light heavyweight. This is before Bisping moved down to middleweight. Bisping was actually fighting light heavyweight at that point. And then he just went on a tear, man. He ended up, like I said here, he ended up beating Tito Ortiz. And then he had his big career knockout, biggest one at this point. He knocked out Chuck Liddell. And it looked like Chuck Liddell was dead. The big rumor online was that Chuck was knocked out so badly he shit his pants as he was laying there. And then he got a title shot at Forrest Griffin at UFC 92, Nemesis. Was that Nemesis? No, Nemesis was Vondelli Silva and Chuck Liddell and Hughes and St. Pierre 3. 92. This one, the main event was Nogueira. I can't remember when Nogueira fought, though. He fight Randy Couture, maybe. Regardless, maybe that was the co-main event because this was for the title. He beat Griffin for the title. And I remember Forrest Griffin when he lost. He ran out of the octagon crying and ran to the back. He didn't even stay in a cage and congratulate Rashad. But yeah, that's Sugar Rashad Evans. He retired. He ended up losing his title to Lyoto Machida. I can't remember when that was, but yeah, that was when Machida went on a tear. So over here, the coach of Team Alpha Male. I think we talked about a couple Alpha Male guys already. Well, at the very least, we talked about Joseph Benavidez. This was the California kid, Uriah Faber. He was the one the UFC wanted to market so badly coming out of the WEC. In the WEC, he was the champion. And he ended up losing the title to Dominic Cruz right before he came to the UFC. And in the WEC, he was like the marketable fighter. He had the cornrows. He was the California kid, the yeah dude guy. And Dana White so badly wanted him to win the UFC title so that he could promote him as a champ because he's very promotable, very charismatic. He gave him so many title fights even though he didn't deserve it that Chael Sonnen nicknamed him Uriah Favor because he was always getting favors. But his UFC record at this point is 1-0. I think he did retire with a positive UFC record, but he never did win that UFC featherweight title. I think it was Jose Aldo that kept beating him. I can't remember. Jose Aldo kicked the shit out of his legs in WEC. I remember that. Yeah, you know what? It was Aldo because he was the featherweight champion. The bantamweight champion was Dominic Cruz. So yeah, it was Jose Aldo he couldn't beat. And I think we already discussed him way back. Did we discuss Jose Aldo? We should have. Yeah, 100% we did. Okay, so down here we got Scott Ferrazzo, the big fat guy. He was in the early UFCs. That's him right there. Who is he beating up on here? He was in during the tournament days. Yeah, UFC 11. Ferrazzo was submitted by Jerry Bolander at UFC 8. That's Sam Fulton he's beating up here. I don't know who that is. You got a bunch of old school UFC tournament fighters. I don't know who they are. I've heard of the name because he wears pants. That's one thing I always remember about him. He wears black jogging pants. Drew the Master Fickett. This is another middle of the road UFC journeyman. I don't think he had any big fights. No big fights. 42-13, a shit ton of fights though. But in terms of UFC big fights, no title fights, nothing like that. So over here we got Spencer the King Fisher. They really wanted something to happen with this guy for a while. jeez, come on. Come on, Randy. Who is it? I can see it in my head. But he lost regardless. Damn, I can't remember who it was. I guess, like I said, we'll see it. Is it on here? Game today and still hold his head high, but it doesn't say. Maybe it didn't happen yet. Oh, I can see him, man. He's got the tattoos in his arms. Oh, it's gonna kill me. It's gonna kill me. But he ended up beating Spencer Fisher. He thought big things were gonna happen for him, and nothing ever happened. Damn it, it's killing me. He looks like Miguel Cotto, the guy I'm thinking of. So up here is NCAA wrestler John Fitch. I think he's an NCAA champion. He had a title fight against George St. Pierre, and George St. Pierre actually out-wrestled him, which was fucking crazy. One of the first times he realized just how much of a fucking machine George St. Pierre was, because this guy was... George St. Pierre started wrestling when he started doing mixed martial arts. John Fitch was wrestling since he was a little kid. So, yeah, he was an American Kickboxing Academy fighter. Okay, I'm trying to see if there's any notable fights other than Brock Larson decision. That's right. Always gets for the most consecutive wins UFC history since somebody defeats a thug. Diego Alves, Diego Sanchez. Earned him a shot at George St. Pierre, UFC 87, 2008. Yeah, that's the fight I'm talking about. Fitch showed hardest. That night in Minnesota, Fitch showed the heart of a lion in what St. Pierre has called his toughest fight ever. St. Pierre's toughest fight ever would be his last fight, actually, which would take place 2 years after this book. It was against Johnny Hendricks, but at the time it was five-round decision. Yeah, I remember it was crazy that George was out wrestling him, because I did not anticipate that at all. I thought for sure Fitch was gonna wrestle the hell out of him, but he never ended up doing that. Okay, so down here we have Kenny Florian, one of the fighters from the very first Ultimate Fighter. He was a lightweight that actually went all the way down to featherweight, and he actually was fighting at middleweight in the Ultimate Fighter Season 1, so he was fighting like 40 pounds heavier than he should be. Great guy. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He trained a bunch of fighters after he was done his UFC career as well. Good little striker. He'd been in quite a bit of wars. There's Clay Guida. A story with Kenny Florian that was very famous in the UFC world was he actually rescued somebody from a Rottweiler attack. A Rottweiler attacked somebody, and he jumped on its back and he gave it a rear naked choke and choked it unconscious and saved that person. So, jeez, I keep bumping this mic. I'm sorry about that, guys, but that was his big MMA story. I remember he did get a title fight against BJ Penn, I believe, or was it Sean Shirk? Well, he lost going against Diego Sanchez, Gray Maynard, and title fights against Sean Shirk and BJ Penn. So yeah, he lost to both Shirk and Penn. Shirk was the champ. Penn beat Shirk, and then he got a shot against Penn afterwards, and he lost that too. Good fighter, though. Really, really, really good human being as well. So up here, Brian Foster. I'm gonna take a risk here and drink some of this Coke. Forgive me if I get the burps here, guys. Brian Foster, he was a welterweight, 3-2 record. It took a tragedy to bring Brian Foster into fighting, as the accidental death of his younger brother during a hiking trip prompted the Oklahoma native to begin training in MMA. Why would that make him want to train MMA? What followed has been an unforgettable journey for the aggressive battler with dynamite in his gloves as he's compiled 3-2 in the UFC. I don't know who this guy is. He steamrolled Brock Larson and submitted Matt Brown, the immortal Matt Brown. We talked about him last time. Here's this guy, and like I said, he's in jail right now. He's a genuine pedophile, sexual predator. He ended up losing to Sean Shirk during Sean Shirk's lightweight Tyler Rain, and he actually pissed hot, if I remember correctly. After, but yeah, they both tested positive. That's right, Shirk as well. So then Shirk ended up, after his suspension was over, he ended up fighting BJ Penn for the vacant title, and that was the whole build up to the fight. Penn was calling him on being what a cheater he was and all this, and it really got in Shirk's head. But yeah, they both were using banned substances. They're not saying why, but in 2009, yeah, he was released after it came out. He was having sex with a minor. Ian the Machine Freeman. He was in the famous UFC 38, the brawl at the Royal Hall. He lost to Tito Ortiz, if I remember correctly. Who did he fight? At 216 Raw on the Octagon, Mark Freeman as a heavy underdog when he took an undefeated rising star Frank. Oh, it was Frank Mir. Okay, he fought Frank Mir at Brawl at the Royal Hall, which is an event we'll see in here, which is very famous for Lightning Lee Murray knocking out Tito Ortiz during a street fight afterwards. But like I said, that'll be on a different edition. That's way in the back, guys. Let's talk about the Predator right now. Badass American wrestler Don Fry. Now, you should all know Don Fry. He's been in a ton of movies as well. He's got that Tom Selleck look. He won the UFC 8 tournament, and he won the Ultimate 96 tournament in Brazil. Or Atlantic City, I think it was, sorry. He went to the finals in Ultimate Brazil, that's right, and he lost to Coleman. But, legendary fights this guy has. He's got a boxing background, and he's an NCAA wrestler. He's got a black belt in judo now, it says. But, man, he's had some fucking epic fights in MMA history. His fight with Takayama in Pride, they literally teed off like it was a hockey fight without jerseys. It was fucking crazy. He had some grudge matches over there as well. He was very famous because he got into pro wrestling over there as well in Japan. So his big entrance in Pride was during the introductions. He would have his back to his opponent in the corner, and then when the little Japanese announcer would scream, in this corner, Dano Fryo, he would turn around slowly and give the guy the death stare, and it would zoom in, and the Japanese crowd would go crazy. But yeah, fucking legend, one of my all-time favorite fighters. Just like a man's man. That's his whole mantra, right? Big cowboy, badass fucking old wrestler, boxer. But yeah, definitely one of the more. I think he's in the UFC Hall of Fame now. I'm not even sure, but he should be if he's not. He's definitely a big part of UFC and Pride history. Like I said, he might not have won any titles in Pride, but he was part of one of the biggest fights, highlight-wise fights in Pride history. Okay, so we're not going to touch too much on this, guys. So Rich the Ace Franklin. Now he's called Ace because he looks like Jim Carrey. Ace Ventura. That's where he got the nickname from. He's a school teacher. The main event of the Ultimate Fighter Season 1. Obviously, Forrest Griffin and Stephen Bonner had that great fight for the Ultimate Fighter contract, and Diego Sanchez beat who did Diego Sanchez fight now? It's been so long, but regardless, this was the main event. Ken Shamrock versus Rich Frank, and Rich knocked him out. And that was his big introduction to the MMA world on Spike TV, because he got the fight on that card. I said I'm not going to spend too much time on this guy, because I've never ever been a big fan of this guy. Like, he's got a really good record and everything, and again, it's no fault of Rich's, I guess. He falls in that same category as he's got a 16, and he's got a UFC record of 13-5 here, and I think he finishes his career in Montreal. Actually, was his last fight against Chuck Liddell, I believe, or maybe that was Chuck Liddell's last fight. He's one of those victims of circumstance. Like, he was UFC champion, and he was popular in UFC when the UFC really didn't have good middleweights. It was probably the weakest middleweight division of all fucking time at the time, so. But he was the middleweight champion during that dark time. He put a ton of wins together, and he's, especially at this time in 2011, this is just the start of Anderson Silva. Is he even in here yet? Yeah, for sure he is. Travis Lutter. Holy shit. Travis Lutter was the guy that didn't make weight to fight Anderson Silva. Last video I told you I couldn't remember the Ultimate Fighter comeback. My god. Random fact, but I'm just thinking about it now. Because, he ended up winning a title from Evan Tanner at UFC 42. Evan Tanner fought that little Puerto Rican guy. Oh, I can't remember his name now. We'll see him in this book eventually. And he was the champion, and Rich Franklin fought him and he beat him. And then he defended the title, was it 2 or 3 times? I can't recall. But he never ever beat anybody of note that was a prime fighter, and again, it's just because that division was so weak during the time, so I don't consider him one of the greats. I just don't. Like I said, he beat Evan Tanner twice, and that's someone we're going to end up talking about here shortly. Tragic tale in MMA. But, yeah, but he's been around. He was around a long time. Like, I think his first UFC fights were in the 30s, but yeah, no. He ended up getting knocked out from Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva's Pride debut, he knocked out Chris Lieben viciously on Ultimate Fight Night. And then he got an immediate title shot against Rich Franklin, and I'm like, he's gonna absolutely kill Rich Franklin, because I watched Anderson Silva in Pride, and he did. He absolutely destroyed him. He made him look like an undercard fighter. I was actually kind of embarrassed for him. I felt bad for Rich. He broke his nose and everything. He was incredibly outclassed. But again, like I said, it's not his fault. Oh, they got more over here. Like, all these fights he had, like, these are all fighters that were past their prime. That was an old Liddell. That was a broken chin Silva. He lost to Dan Henderson. He lost to Forrest Griffin. Mark Hamill. This is an incredible guy. Incredible guy down here, Mark Hamill. He is actually deaf. I think Hamill even beat him. That's when he lost both these fights to Anderson Silva badly. He beat Jason McDonald. I think he beat Yushin Okami. Yeah, Travis Lutter, there you go. Nate the Rock Quarry from The Ultimate Fighter. Like, none of these fighters are... If he would have beat these two guys in their prime, he'd probably be one of the greatest middleweights of all time. Even if he would have beat Dan Henderson, but, no. Like I said, it's just, he didn't have a division to fight, I guess, at the time. Who knows how he would have stacked up against these guys, but, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm just bitter, and I have nothing to be bitter about, because he's a really great guy, but I just, I've never ever been a big Rich Franklin fan. Okay, so let's move on here. What are we at? An hour now. Okay, so we got Anthony Strickland, the Freak, if I remember correctly. Yep, right there. Can't see because of the light. 2-2, Tony the Freak Strickland. He actually was famous for knocking out Anderson Silva with a spinning back elbow, if I remember correctly. Or no, Anderson Silva knocked him out in Rage Cage with a spinning back elbow right before Anderson Silva came into the UFC. He lost to Kevin Jackson. Kevin Jackson, Jesus Christ, that was the first UFC, technically, middleweight or light heavyweight champion. Travis Fulton, the Iron Man, this guy, where's his record? Look at his record. 246, 48, and 10. I remember this guy was fighting at one point every weekend in the United States for a long time. Him and Dan Severn were like crazy. They fought like 10 fucking times. Again, nothing in the UFC though. But yeah, like I said, he fought every freaking weekend for years. Manuel Gambarian, like I said, he was in the finals of the Ultimate Fighter against Nate Diaz. He's cousins of Karo Parisian. And during the Ultimate Fighter Season 5 filming, Karo Parisian actually came and he was a guest coach for a day, and he actually annoyed Nate Diaz enough that Nate Diaz almost fought him in the Ultimate Fighter in a back area. And they almost got into it. Like I said, Nate and Manny are really good friends, so they fought in the finals, and Manuel, during a takedown, he dislocated his shoulder. And Nate won via TKO because of that. But Tiki's mostly a coach, if I remember correctly. He was Chuck Liddell's coach for a while. 0-4 UFC record. No, it was Tito Ortiz and Quentin Jackson. He was their coach for a while. I remember during the time Ariane Celeste actually did Playboy, she was dating this guy, and I thought it was so fucking weird. She was dating this 0-4 coach that was like 10 years older than her, and it made no sense to me. I remember I was like, what the fuck? That's because there was like a big Playboy promotion where like a red carpet thing or something for her release, and she was there with him. I guess they'd been dating for like a year or something, and I was like, what the fuck? How'd he fucking nab her? Up next, Takanori Gomi. He was the Pride lightweight champion and the 2005 Pride Grand Prix champion. So he was the 2005 Pride Grand Prix champion was the lightweights. The lightweights in the Pride FC was actually the middleweight division, the 185 division. And yeah, he was the champion of that. Yeah, that's right, because middleweight was the light heavyweight division in UFC, and heavyweight was heavyweight, yeah. He fought into UFC as a lightweight, though 155 pounds, so he cut weight to fight in UFC. And yeah, he didn't fare too well in the UFC. He was only 1-2. But he was very, 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 very protected by the Japanese promotion in Pride, because he was the only Japanese champion Pride ever had. And they actually would make him fight. They would make him have non-title fights if they thought it was going to be a difficult fight for him. I remember he fought Marcus Aurelio at a Dynamite show, or a New Year's Eve show, Shockwave, and Marcus Aurelio beat him. He actually choked him unconscious. He came back and he beat Aurelio for a title fight. He beat Aurelio, put his title on the line, and he beat him in a decision, I think. But he never did anything in UFC. This is the guy, like I said, that Nick Diaz famously beat with a Gogo Plata at Pride Real Deal in Las Vegas. But yeah, he was good. He went 13-1 with one no contest during his tear. But again, like I said, his opponents were really cherry-picked in Pride. And he would have non-title fights if they were worried about it, which is really fucking cheesy. So over here we have Akihiro Kono. I'm pretty sure he's a Pride fighter, but he did fight in UFC. So a lot of these these Pride fighters guys, they ended up in the UFC, and a lot of them didn't do too well in the UFC. And for Pride fanboys like me, who always thought they would destroy UFC fighters, I had to just accept the realization that they're good and they were better probably, but they were all juiced to the grills, because in Pride they didn't do drug testing, so they were all juiced. So when they came to the UFC, obviously they're strict, drug testing and everything else. They couldn't juice anymore. That's why a lot of these Pride fighters would come over and they would just look softer. They would run out of gas a lot sooner, and they just generally did worse in the UFC than they did in Pride. And, some of them came over within the year Pride shut down, so it wasn't like there was a big gap. But Akihiro Kono, Pride Pancreas Shuto, win over Tandem McRoy in UFC debut in 07, and a hard decision loss to Dan Hardy and John Fitch. So yeah, he didn't really do much in the UFC. He fought Shogun and Matt Hughes. I don't know. I don't remember him being in the UFC, to be honest with you. Gabriel Gonzaga. This is the guy I told you when I trained with Randy Couture. Randy Couture was getting ready to fight him the month after that seminar, and he ended up beating him for the heavyweight title, defended his heavyweight title. This guy's claim to fame, and he'll always be infamous in UFC for the knockout of Mirko Krokop at UFC 71 or 73. Nations Collide, the one in France. He knocked out Mirko Krokop. So UFC 70, there you go. He knocked out Mirko Krokop, and Krokop fell backwards on his ankle, his leg and knee went backwards, and it termed the coined the phrase in MMA, getting Krokopped. What Gabe did to him. I remember we were watching it. Actually, we were in Steinbach, Manitoba, for a Muay Thai seminar. And that Saturday, after we were done doing a seminar, we all went back and we watched it because it was the first free pay-per-view on Spike TV, full pay-per-view. And we watched it. And we were big Pride fans, all three of us, and we were so bummed out when Gabe knocked him out because we wanted to see Randy Couture versus Mirko Krokop. I didn't want to see Randy Couture versus Gabe Gonzaga, but lo and behold, Gonzaga knocked Krokop the fuck out. It was brutal. Here's Barrie, Ontario, Canada's own Gary Goodrich, Big Daddy. I think he passed away now. I think he's passed on, like, in the last few years. But he's one of the pioneers. He was at UFC 8. I remember he had a gi on. This is the picture right here. He wore a gi and he got a guy in a reverse crucifix and he just elbowed the side of his head till the guy was limp. Knocked him out big time. And then he switched to trunks after that. His UFC record's 4-4. They were all tournament fights, but yeah, he was a big motherfucker. Yeah, he was big in Pride too. I forgot to say he was a big Pride fighter as well. But he never ever really achieved anything great. Like I said, he's got a professional record of 23-23. A few big fights in Pride, but like I said, he never ever. He was in the Pride 2000 Grand Prix, for example. He never made it out of the first round. He never did anything of note, achievement-wise, in his MMA. Gerard Gordeau, the French, or Netherlands, sorry, UFC fighter. This is the Stomp. UFC 1, yeah. He's the one that knocked out, I believe he knocked out, the big sumo guy's teeth and went flying towards the announce table. It's a famous story in UFC. The very first fight, he got him down, he kicked him in the face, the Hawaiian guy, and his teeth went flying. He won 2 bouts neither before being submitted by Hoist Gracie in a final. Okay, so he was in a final. This was the guy Hoist beat in the finals then. I was gonna say he's famous in the UFC for something. He wasn't the guy that kicked him, they would have said that. No, he was then. He was the opening. He introduced mixed martial arts to the world as the opening bout in UFC 1. And you're out, kicks Tua in the face. All of a sudden, I see that tooth flying out. Yeah, this is it. This is the guy that knocked out that big. It was a big Hawaiian guy's teeth. He knocked it out and it went flying towards the commentators. It was pretty fucking insane. Jonathan Goulet from Victoriaville, Quebec, Canada. He was teammates with Mark Hominick and those guys. Sean Tompkins, he was a Sean Tompkins fighter. Sean Tompkins was a coach. I think it was out of Barrie. I can't remember. Somewhere in Ontario anyway. And super, super, super nice guy. A kickboxer. And he was, at one point, he coached George St. Pierre, Mark Hominick, all those guys. He was like George's first coach. And he ended up passing away from a heart attack, which is so sad because we seen him like 3 months before he died in Toronto. And he actually took the time to stop and talk with us. We asked him about the fight with Jake Shields, with George, and he felt really confident because he was still George St. Pierre's striking coach. George St. Pierre wasn't with Sean Tompkins' gym, but he was still a striking coach at the time before George later on would move on to Freddie Roach for a boxing coach. But yeah, Jonathan Goulet was one of his fighters, 4-5 in the UFC. He had victories over Luke Como, Paul Georgiev, and Hiroyoshi Hironaka. I don't know who that is. With Hironaka winning him fight at the Night Honors. But he would lose to Irish hand grenade Mark Davis, Mike Quickswick, and Dwayne Bang Ludwig, another guy met in Toronto. Okay, so this is a perfect way to end the video. We are on the living legend himself, Royce Gracie. So Royce Gracie, the very, very first UFC was actually an event put on by the Gracie family. So the Gracie family, all throughout the 80s, they came to the U.S. from Brazil, and they were, trying to get their gyms for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, recognized, and they would go to other martial art gyms, and they would challenge coaches and challenge. It was called the Gracie Challenge, actually. You can YouTube them. They're pretty intense to watch online. But what they would do is they would challenge people in gyms, like coaches and top fighters of gyms, like say a karate gym. They would challenge them to a street fight in the gym in front of everybody, and they would always end up choking them out, putting them in arm locks, leg locks. These poor bastards didn't know what hit them because in the 70s, 80s, karate in the U.S. was pretty much the only form of martial arts, and everyone, foolishly at the time thought that was, you wanted to defend yourself, you would take karate, not Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is a completely different take on Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, as it's more ground fighting, it's more judo-based, I guess you could say. So the whole first UFC was put on by Royce's brother Horian, and the R in these Gracie's names, by the way, are silent, guys. So his brother Horian put on the first UFC, and they wanted a representative from the Gracie family to be the representative for the tournament. Now they have a legendary, absolutely legendary older brother that's undefeated. They say, because they count street fights as well and gym fights, they say the older brother, I can't remember, some ridiculous, 500 or something. His name's Rickson Gracie. He's the oldest brother and the best fighter of them all. Absolutely legendary in the MMA Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world, but Horian did not want him to be the representative because, he'd be this, because he's a specimen too, he'd be this specimen Brazilian Hulk that would beat up all these poor bastards, and it wouldn't really showcase how deadly this art is, so he picked the youngest and arguably, out of all the brothers, least accomplished, in grappling title-wise, brothers. Basically of all the brothers, there's a bunch, brothers and cousins. There's Rickson, Horian, Hoyler, and Royce, I think, are the four. Of Rickson's are Helio is the grandfather. Helio's kids, and Helio's brother Carlos has, Henzo and Hein and all of them. But he was arguably the weakest of them all. So they put him in there to showcase how deadly this art is. And as you can see, he won UFC 1, UFC 2, and UFC 4. And here's famously fighting Art Jimerson in his very first UFC fight. Art Jimerson was a boxer. His very first UFC was promoted as all these different styles. Well, the first guy that always fought was a boxer, an actual boxer called Art Jimerson, and he's famous in UFC lore because he fought with one boxing glove and one open palm glove. And it was easy as hell. Anyone that follows MMA now or has any basic knowledge of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or basic training knows, if you ever fight somebody that's got no training in it whatsoever, you put them on their back, they're yours, you own them. And basically that's what he did that whole first tournament. He beat Ken Shamrock, he beat Jimerson, and then Gord Godot in the finals. He beat Ken Shamrock, put him in a choke, to which Ken Shamrock says he didn't tap out, which is bullshit, he tapped out. And that was really embarrassing for Shamrock, because Ken Shamrock actually came from a mixed martial arts organization in Japan called Pancrase, so he was actually the only legit mixed martial arts fighter there, even though Pancrase was technically hybrid wrestling, pro wrestling, real pro wrestling. Palm strikes and leg locks and all this stuff, but still, always choked him with his gi. And I remember watching this UFC, like I said, last video. My uncle actually bought the VHS when it came out, or rented it. I remember a whole bunch of us went to watch it because we thought it was going to be like Bloodsport. And I'll never forget, this little guy in pajamas, I always thought to myself, beat everybody, beat the big strong muscle guy that looked like a pro wrestler, Ken Shamrock, and he beat them all. And like I said, he did it 2 tournaments in a row, and then he took a tournament off and he came back for 4, and he won that one as well. He didn't win tournament 3. He couldn't come out after his fight with Chemo. Like, he just couldn't come out. I don't know if he was hurt or he was winded or what, but he would come out and he would go and he would fight at the 2000 Pride Grand Prix in like I can't remember what it was, you guys. It was like a 45-minute, hour-long fight. I can't remember. They didn't put a time limit on it. He famously fought Kazushi Sakuraba, who's known as the Gracie Hunter in Japan because he's beaten all the Gracies. He's beaten every Gracie but one. A young Gracie beat him. Helson, I think, beat him like towards the end when Sakuraba was older. But yeah, there he is. That was the opening round. He beat Takada, and then he fought Sakuraba in the finals. Sakuraba, like I said, they fought for an hour. Like the Japanese. That would never happen today with an event. The Japanese wanted Sakuraba to win so badly. They were banking on Royce gassing out, so they made this one bout unlimited time limit. So how long did it go on for? It's gotta say. It's 36 minutes draw, and I've had a rematch with Ken. No, that was the UFC fight where it says a 90-minute epic. So an hour and a half these two fought. Imagine watching a pay-per-view in an hour and a half. These two are still fighting. He ended up breaking Royce's heels with kicks. Royce would be laying on his back, and he ended up kicking his heels, and he broke his heels or something, or broke a heel. And you know, his brothers or his dad famously, his dad's down here, Helio, the old man. His dad famously threw the towel in, and while Royce couldn't get off his stool because it was like 10 minute rounds, and he'd get a break. So he couldn't get off the stool, so his dad threw the towel, and it was very famous. And then he would go on to break Renzo Gracie's arm, and he choked out, I think, or he beat Ryan Gracie as well. He beat 3 Gracies, and Hoyler as well. He beat Hoyler. So he beat 4 Gracies before he fought that Helson when he was older, and he lost to him finally. So after that 2000 Grand Prix, you didn't see Royce again until 2006. They randomly, UFC brought him out to fight an in-peak Matt Hughes, a specimen of a wrestler, one of my favorite fighters of that time, Matt Hughes. And yeah, he was no match for him. Like, it was a really good example of how far MMA had come. That, you know, this legendary black belt, the legend of the sport, he just couldn't keep up to the specimen that was Matt Hughes, because Matt Hughes had submission defense, and he was a physical specimen himself, including a wrestler. So, you know, Royce couldn't take him down if he wanted. I think Royce was flopping even. Royce had no gi to fight in. As you can see in Pride in Japan, you were allowed to wear wrestling shoes, gis, whatever you wanted, but in UFC, obviously, it's trunks. And yeah, he ended up getting knocked out. Hughes got him Hughes took his back, pinned him down, spread him out, and just elbowed the side of his head till McCarthy stopped the fight. And yeah, Helio was there that night. That was UFC 60 in Los Angeles. It was the first UFC in LA. There was a bunch of celebrities there. And with that, guys, that's going to be it for this this edition of the UFC Encyclopedia. We'll get back to it. There's Renzo right there. Like I said, he lost to Sakuraba as well. He was one of the crazy victims. But yeah, we'll get back to this in another video, you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and with that being said, everyone have a great day, great night, whatever it may be, and peace out. Peace out. Take it easy, guys.